I want to, I know we should take a break, but I'm just gonna, this is like the last mile of a marathon, I feel like, or the Ironman. So I'm just gonna go straight into, and we've brought back as panelist speakers from all the other sessions that are able to join us. And I want to hopefully share my screen.
And if
On some questions.
Raise your hand, because if you're coming in and I missed you to promote you back to panelist, just raise your hand and I'll make sure you get that access.
Oh yeah. And so this is the last session, and I wanted, normally, and I always hear this from so many people, like we go to conferences, usually there's like 20 at the same time, so we're all over the place, and then there's nothing ever really that brings us all together again, right? And so this was an attempt to, however we can with everyone's time, just bring everyone back together to go, where do we go now? Or, what have we learned? What has inspired us through this? And if you were able to join me at the top of the symposium yesterday, I, put out these questions for all attendees to think about in terms of advancing equity and justice and preservation. Particularly, how can we look to disrupt power and privilege in historic preservation? And you heard that even just in this last session. How do we redistribute resources and decision making in preservation? And you heard that in the session before last. How can we transform the ways in which historic preservation places are preserved and presented and elevated? You heard that throughout these 2 days. And how can we honor the places in which our ancestors fought for our rights? And I just want to say, so Tejpaul like basically stole my concluding remarks for the whole entire symposium. Someone had texted me, that's how well you've been a mentor. So I guess I should take that as a compliment. But I also, as particularly in this last session, I've been a fan of Gail. I don't even want to like date the time, but it's been, I think now 2 decades that I've been in academia as a student, as a scholar, as a learner. And so Gail's and Sarah's and Laura's presentation really brought me to this, like, what is our action agenda, right? And that we really seek collective access and to support each other in our collective liberation. We often hear in social justice movements, my liberation is your liberation is my liberation, right? Like we cannot be free without each other. So how do we look at that in preservation? And as Gail, Sarah, and Laura's presentation had touched on, that our approaches, as we've seen throughout these 2 days, our approaches are intersectional. As you hear everyone's talking to each other, like we're doing like live footnotes and citations to each other and shout outs throughout the session. And how do we do all of this? Through the work we do in preservation education, in preservation practice, in preservation policy. And as Angelo, I grabbed something that you said, nothing about us without us, right? And so really, I want to leave in this last session that we have with each other. Hopefully, we can spend the next 45 minutes as speakers, and we'll look into the Q&A from all the participants that I'd mentioned. We have over 900 folks who have registered. And this alone, not only the lineup and the speakers and the wealth of scholarship and knowledge we all brought to the table in the last 2 days, but even the testimony of like 900 people. We almost broke the internet on Zoom because the capacity is 1,000. But this speaks volumes that our stories are no longer going to stay or remain in the margins, and that we have to have it at the center of our work, not just ours, but ours collectively. And so I'm going to close out this screen share and just open it up. It might be like a live jazz session or a musical session, where not just jazz, but many musical approaches where we really just riff off each other and be inspired by each other. So I want to see if there's any beginning thoughts or questions folks would like to pose to each other. As I'd asked earlier, like how do we move forward with this? with these concepts, with these practices we've shared with each other.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Allison.
Hello, Michelle. So I want to say we all need to give Michelle a big round of applause for, virtual applause or, whatever, for putting this conference together. I think for me, it was very inspirational because I had been a little disillusioned with historic preservation. And that's why I went and got a PhD in history. And so today, the last few days have helped me to realize that there's other people out there that have similar feelings to what I've had, and we're all working in our own ways to overcome all the problems that are with the governance and structural features of current preservation policy. So I want to applaud Michelle, and I want to applaud everyone who presented at the conference and shared all the ways in which they're looking at preserving and documenting and celebrating the American identity and belongingness.
Thank you, Allison. And I actually want to start it off. I was going to bring this up, and I don't mean to embarrass one of my GAs, but earlier this week, we're in first week of the semester, and she has been doing exceptional work, groundbreaking work here in Maryland as part of an NPS-funded grant on Asian Americans in Maryland. And she's been my research assistant, my TA. She's been doing such amazing work in the last year, particularly in this time of COVID and having little to no access to archives or people, that an alumni, advised her in her final project and thinking about her work, that she shouldn't do work on being Asian American or Asian American historic preservation work because no one is going to hire her. And of course, I think we were on Zoom and I couldn't hide it. And I said, and I've been thinking about this ever since then, I can't imagine my life if someone told me that and I just listened and I didn't, dismiss it. And that I think many of us have heard that in our fields and in our works of like, if someone told us don't study it because you're not going to get a job. And Tej Paul spoke to it. He's here not for the money, not that we get paid a lot of money in preservation overall. And so I just wanted to just even pose that question. What advice would you give to preservationists, regardless of age and where they're at, who have been told time and time again, don't do this kind of work, this work that is maybe tied to justice and equity?
I'll start, if that's okay. I obviously that person was wrong, right? But I just want to reiterate something I said yesterday. This field isn't going to matter if it doesn't evolve. The nation is changing, the demographics are changing. If historic preservation wants to remain relevant, it must evolve. And so those stories absolutely matter. And so the grad students who are making that the focus of their work right now, they are going to be highly sought after. They will be. We're going to make sure that they're highly sought after.
Well, and just to say, my student has read, I think, every Asian American context statement and theme study up to date, which I don't know how many students have actually read a single context statement or fully a nomination form. And I'm like, that is not an Asian American thing. That is like a knowledge that not many in grad school get the opportunity to learn, and that she has gotten a chance to meet many of the authors of these theme studies, context statements, and nomination forms, which we don't get a chance. We read the nomination forms and we don't get to actually meet the people like everyone here who's been doing this kind of work. Any other advice? I see Antonia's hand is up. And you're muted, Antonia, sorry. And then I see Stephanie's hand after Antonia.
Sorry. Hello, everybody. It's absolutely great, amazing, powerful, emotional to see everybody and to have heard you all. And thank you again, Michelle. To your student, Michelle, So 40 plus years ago, my first advisor at Stanford, when I said I wanted to study Chicano history, he said to me, there is no such thing as Chicano history. Moreover, he said, even if there were Chicano history, you shouldn't study it because you would be too emotional. So I tell this story only to underscore that not much has changed despite all of our work. So that is why all of this work matters. And to your student, obviously, you say, do not dismiss it, do not attend to it. The person that told you that doesn't know what they're talking about because they don't know the work that you're doing. So keep doing it, not only keep doing it, but keep doing it with strength and passion and energy and brilliance and a certain amount of rage.
Yes. Thank you, Antonia. And I saw Stephanie and then who else? I forget.
Well, it's similar to Antonia. Hi, Antonia. As an early participant in an interdisciplinary program, both undergrad and then later at Penn in American Civilization, we were told that we wouldn't get hired, that historians like Bernard Bailyn thought it was bullshit, and people who wrote their dissertations or tried to submit dissertations that were interdisciplinary were dismissed. But so, I mean, that was one of the reasons I didn't go into an academic career, but more importantly, your student needs to have listened to all of the presentations and all of the different ways in which this knowledge is being put to work in public history. The National Park Service is just one organization where you can really pursue this work outside of academia. So I wouldn't let that advice give much credit. There's lots of options, including ones that you can forge your own.
Thank you, Stephanie. Laura was.
Yeah, I just wanted to say also, just give Karen kudos. I don't know if you called out her name, but I'm going to call her out, Karen. You've probably seen her. She's been on along with Michelle and I at every single session. She did tech checks. She has backups of all your PowerPoints. She's also a dual degree student. So not only is she pursuing a Master of Historic Preservation, but she's also pursuing Master of Community Planning, and she's also a GA, and it's also the first week of school. So I just wanted to say that she's just on fire and amazing, and thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you also to Laura for being really on top of everything throughout this symposium. Just quick shout out. But yes, and sorry, we're just going to call you out, Karen Yee, because there are over 900 people registered, and I think someone will hire you right after graduation pretty quickly, as we keep saying your name, Karen Yee. And just to know that so many of us, I mean, we could all raise our hands, right? Someone who told us to not do what we're doing. Actually, this postdoc, one of my advisors refused to write my letter of support because she said that I wouldn't get it and that I wasn't good enough to be in academia. And so, so I've been told many times in my own short academic career that I didn't belong and I shouldn't try. But it wasn't people like that who told, who inspired me. I mean, maybe the rage helped me. But it's folks like as Tejpaul had mentioned, who really inspired us to do the work, and even for me to see my work then pass on to Tejpaul. And Tejpaul didn't, of course, mention, but when I was mentoring him in the doctoral applications, I told him only go if you get a full ride. And he has the highest fellowship offer in his university. And so I said, you get paid to go to school. Not only do you go to grad school and you get your PhD, but you get paid. And that is the advice I give to my students. And I know, some leadership may be like, we don't have the money. Well, so that's, that is my advice that I give to our students and to the future, is that make sure you get paid if it's in graduate school, if it's serving on diversity task force, whatever, that make sure you get paid and you get compensated. So any other advice? I see Franklin's hand is up, and Allison.
I think this is great. Thanks, Michelle, for doing this, and College Park for organizing this great gathering. I think we shouldn't waste the numbers of people who registered and participated. There's got to be some way to pay somebody to put this list together, digitize it so that it's geographical, searchable by race, ethnicity, section, and so on, so that it's accessible to everybody. So if someone is in Arizona or in Alaska, he or she or they can access units. Well, now it's national. Now we're all used to Zoom and can be in touch with one another. So it doesn't matter if someone is in the immediate neighborhood or not, but you can actually see people and get together with folks and see who's simpatico.
Thanks, Franklin. And I see Allison's hand up and then Laura's hand up.
So I wanted to address what Michelle spoke about with her student. And her own experience. It's really sad to hear that you would have an advisor that wouldn't be supportive of your application to apply for a postdoc. And it's really sad to hear that a professor would tell a student not to study a particular specific area of her interest for her dissertation. Now that just goes to show that there is the example of whiteness as the privileged area of study that we're all fighting against here today. But it's a great example for your student from the standpoint that she has firsthand had this opportunity to see that this will be what she will continue to come up against. It may not be as overt as that particular comment, and obviously that person is a bit out of touch in terms of understanding what's going on right now in the field of looking at our American identity and culture and the stories that need to be told. But it is not something that will not continue to come up. And so, as many of us have learned here in terms of our own work, we have to continue to fight these kinds of ideas that people present to us. And we just have to, step around them to do the things that we want to do and feel are important to our work and to our structural system in terms of society. The thing about what she's doing in terms of her work, I mean, that's kind of a stupid thing to say. She's doing specific research where she's doing a case study. All of the skills that she's developing in terms of her case study are applicable to many other areas of research. So that just is ridiculous. We're supposed to do something specific in terms of our work so that we become an expert in something, and then we can carry that over in terms of transferable skills to other places.
Thank you, Allison. I'm totally snapping at that. So Laura, and then I think I saw Tej Paul's hand up too.
So I saw the comment in the questions, Leah Shihiro, I apologize if I say it wrong, but it says, as a young cultural heritage professional, how do we get involved? Do we need PhDs to do the research and co-create spaces for the research? And it made me think about a number of different things. One of them is the emphasis on this idea of intelligence and education, and as it being equating to our worth as people, or whether that's our productivity and what we produce as our worth of people, which is just, it just shows how much we exist within this capitalistic framework of our own value. And I think as scholars, it's something that's often forgotten because we are doing incredible work and we are making change through the work that we're doing. But I think in a lot of ways, it makes me think about the value and expertise of community members who will never have a degree, and these people that also can lead these efforts and what we may think of as academic efforts. But in some ways, I think there are spaces that have been made to that you need that PhD, you need that degree. It's something I think about as somebody with only a master's, and how frustrating that is, because what that's doing is it's creating a power structure and upholding systems of inequity and saying, do you have the privilege to get your PhD? Do you have the ability to get your PhD so that you can have this spot in this system? And so just kind of thinking about systems of higher education as being built within systems of oppression. And I just think of the University of Minnesota as being a land-grant institution that's fundamentally built on the oppression of Native peoples in the state. And then also, and then also kind of, I was thinking about different ways of participation, and I think about activist networks, and I think about work outside of academic institutions that I do, because activists, they do this work, they do the research, they put out op-eds, they are doing this type of activism. And in some ways, I think one of the best ways to make change is by joining in these other justice efforts that may be outside the realm of academia, but are still moving towards these justice efforts that I think we all are moving towards. And I was also thinking about creating this broader network. I think about kind of a care web that is in care work. It's a concept of building this network of people so we uplift each other and we don't feel that it's a personal responsibility to rely on ourselves, but instead we have a community that supports each other. And in some ways, I also just want to say how thankful I am to learn from all of you during this entire time. I've really appreciated all of your perspectives. Also, I think about, so there's somebody who I will call out, and she wasn't in this, but her name is Sarah Marsom, has been doing really wonderful equity work in the field of historic preservation and really trying to just systematically change preservation so that we can uphold more people and to make it more equitable and to dismantle a lot of these systems that have been overlaid that, you know, keep many people out of the field or keep their voices from being heard. Long rant, just that the whole concept of being young and trying to break in and got my brain a little.
Thank you, Laura. And I want to, I think it was Tejpal, and let me know, raise your hand if you also want to go after Tejpal.
Yes, I mean, I just want to touch on, you know, what you were saying about Karen, and then also the question that was in the chat is, you know, it was very similar for me. And yeah, I mean, Michelle was one individual who kind of forced me to do a PhD. But then, you know, she wasn't the only one. There was many individuals who helped me along the way. Actually, one individual that I mentioned in my talk as well, Navdeep Singh, who was a former policy director at SALDEF, he actually refused to write a letter of rec for me because he said I can do better. And I still remember that. He said I can do better. I have more potential than applying for what I'm applying for right now. So he actually refused. And then also conversations with Kathy Gudis at UC Riverside. You know, when I was first applying, you know, I had a conversation with her on my application, and she helped me transfer my application from one department to another because one department would have more funding than the other. So there was like a lot of help that I received along the way. And, you know, in regards to the question that was asked in the chat, I don't think you need a PhD to pursue it. I ended up going that route, but I think it's, excuse my language, but that's bullshit. There's a lot of community, you know, organizers and leaders who are doing the work, like I mentioned, Bernali and Ornivan, like they're doing great work in the Bay Area. So I think, you know, if you surround yourself with the right people, you can do whatever you want without a PhD.
Anyone else would like to contribute to this thread? I also want to mention that I found it, I said it at the top of our symposium yesterday, while I was in the field meeting many of you, not in academia, I thought it was very interesting. I was like, why? It's a person of color or like, you know, whoever, minoritized group person with a PhD, but I don't get to cite you because you're not producing in that academic way, right? And I found it very frustrating because I was like, I want your voices to be heard in preservation education in particular. And so this is what brought forth this symposium, was to bring these voices that often are not published in academic research or journals. But also I wanted to highlight that there are many of us who, there are people who are on the PhD spectrum. I want to say, you saw doctoral students, doctoral candidates, those who used to be ABD, then went MIA, and I was one of them, and, to emeritus, right? To, distinguished professors. So I also wanted to be, just capture that like there's something about the decision for us to even continue in our work, and acknowledging that doctoral programs in the pursuit is very elite, right? Particularly those who have chosen to go to R1 universities, Research 1 universities, and what that means, and that, many of us recognize the debt we actually go into, because we still have to pay student loans, till we die. But and so we take on that burden, we take on that debt. And so I wanted to acknowledge that, as I want to then shift over if there's another question folks would like to pose to the group.
Michelle,
Okay.
sorry, before you go on, if you'll just indulge me for a minute.
Yeah.
And this is like 30 seconds that I cut from my paper yesterday. But I just want to express some affirmation and some gratitude. I'm thinking that I've been doing this for 20 years, and my mentor is here, Gail. So I want to acknowledge, 20 years ago as a graduate student, and it's the opposite, message, which is that you can do this, and you'd be very good at it. And here's an opportunity, and here's another opportunity. So, I'm forever grateful to Gail for providing those opportunities and the training and the mentorship and the support, not just while I was a grad student, but up to this day. And then also Stephanie, who gave Gail and I an opportunity, but gave me an opportunity with the Chavez work, and then continued after I graduated, and then went into academia and still had opportunities come my way. And so literally, I wouldn't be here right now at this moment with all of you if not for the two of them, and I wouldn't be. I have tenure now, and I'm so happy with my career, and I wouldn't have those things without them. After I finished my PhD, and I went on the job market, I'd been thinking I would just go a traditional history, U.S. history route, but the opportunities, the higher opportunities I had were because I did public history, I did preservation. So Cal State Fullerton had a preservation program, and that's where I started. And so literally, I couldn't be more true that I wouldn't be here if not for them.
Yes.
So thank you.
Stephanie. Thank you, Ray. Stephanie? You're muted right now.
Yeah, I'm just doing it. Well, I'd like to throw out a question. I think it's in the same vein, but I think, and I expressed this a number of times, that the whole process of nominating a property, particularly not trying to go through the NHL program, has become so precious, so over-professionalized, that it is a huge barrier. The standards that we've been asking for an NHL nomination would rival a PhD dissertation. So I think that's a real issue that needs to be dealt with. Obviously, I'm not dealing with it anymore, but it's one that I did raise a number of times because it is so expensive. Not only the theme studies I can see, but the theme studies are intended to do some of the work in terms of the context and whatever, and the expectations are just put NHL nominations out of reach very quickly. The other thing I would like to say, just being apparently one of the wise elders here, or at least one of the elders, looking back at my own career, it gives me a lot of hope and optimism for the program to continue to move in a very positive direction. Because when I started in the Park Service, my first job was writing capsule descriptions of National Register nominations for the Red Book. I don't know if any of you have even said that, but that contained all of the National Register nominations at the time, and they were all of great white guys and the rich and powerful and architectural man, you know, and 900,000 entries later, we have made a lot of progress. And so I have a lot of optimism and faith, particularly hearing today's presentations by people several generations behind me, that this is going in a positive direction, but there is still a lot to do to make it more accessible without losing the integrity of the process and the scholarship behind it.
Thank you, Stephanie. Anyone would like to remark? I see Fallon's hand.
I just wanted to add a counterpoint, which is that I engage a lot with historic preservation specialists doing Section 106 review work for infrastructure projects, development projects, and historic tax credit applications related to tax increment financing and other community economic development work. And there's like a complete other end of the spectrum here, which is I wouldn't say a lack, but there's a kind of ethics of expediency, that's an epistemology of expediency that is driving preservation work at this, for me, a sprawling scale. And I don't know what infrastructure we have as a field to contest, let alone support any more kind of substantive work with that breadth of historic preservation specialists doing that kind of work. So right now I'm supervising someone who's working on a $2 billion FEMA project here in New Orleans. And let's not get into the fact that like they don't have enough people staffed on this project to do the preservation work that I am supervising a student doing this work. But it really just brings home to me that it's just by chance that the person who's leading this work here is a graduate of an urban studies program, happens to be the one at my current institution, so I can give them their props. And that has informed their understanding of justice theories and practices that should be taken into account even when you're doing a kind of a context statement for historic streetscapes. We can't talk about that in New Orleans without getting into those kind of issues. But for most people who wouldn't have that training, that wouldn't even come into play into a context statement. And so I think that there's a real challenge before us to think outside the box of designation processes around the power of our expertise and the power of our network to influence decision-making on the ground.
Gail, I think. Yes, Gail.
Well, I wanted to ask one of our elders, one of our co-elders, Stephanie, who understands the legislative process, and you've seen administrations come and go. And I'm thinking for all the young historians and cultural workers who are hoping like a job might be married to good politics that advances diversity. What do you think is a realistic and yet hopeful expectation under a new administration?
Well, I think it's better than it has been in a while. I think that, again, I would keep an eye on who the new leaders are and who the allies were. But the fact that you had the head of the House Appropriations Committee for the National Park Service as your speaker, you have a receptive audience in Congress and the various caucuses, and Preservation Advocacy Week is coming up. So I'm not advocating lobbying because I'm still employed part-time, but the reality is you need to make your voice heard, and your voice has been heard, because the response over the past couple of years, just with the increased funding for the underrepresented community grants and the possibility of legislation for national heritage areas, finally, and the new grants for documenting rural areas and the expansion of the civil rights grant criteria. Those are all positive things. So there are powerful voices in Congress to reach out to continue to, share the information that we're developing and to tie it. I think I'm teaching a course right now within the Park Service on relevancy of historic preservation to major issues. So I listened to your presentation on dealing with the history of disability legislation, whatever, because that's one of the topics we're discussing. I think it also really behooves you as practicing in historic preservation going forward. You can't count on anyone else to articulate how you're relevant to the major issues of the day. It's on your shoulders to articulate where you fit into climate change, where you fit into Black Lives Matter, where you fit into the disability issues. That I think is the most important lesson that I learned in my career, is not to sit around waiting for someone to be an advocate or to be able to say, yeah, come on in and join the crowd. I had to talk my way in over and over and over and go, hey, you're going to do urban revitalization? Well, guess who has the biggest presence in the Park Service in urban areas? Cultural resources. What a revelation. So that would be my response to that, is you need to be your own best advocate and to reach out to people who you already know are interested.
Thank you.
I see Franklin's hand up.
Yeah, I wonder, I might jump in here to suggest that there is not just maybe a case study and how done it. If you think about the Japanese American experience, a very tiny ethnic group that generated enough congressional goodwill and allies to provide for the only instance in American history when the government has officially apologized for its actions and provided reparations. The only time in American history. How did this group do that? There are studies now that you can look at in how this group generated allies and conducted ways in which they could generate support for this legislation. Plus the historic preservation stuff that came out with the Japanese American Confinement Sites Project. A lot of money went into preservation efforts for not just the 10 concentration camps, but a lot of the assembly centers and other places. So, I mean, there's really a how to do it textbook out there.
Thank you, Franklin. And I see Antonia's hand is up.
Thank you. Since it's the elder group, I'm going to check in a little bit. So, Michelle, you started our conversation by asking what's next. So what is next? I'm wondering, with the new administration and a new head of the director, secretary of the Department of the Interior, what policy changes would we collectively as a group ask for or recommend or demand? So my question is, how do we act as a group? What do we do with all of the incredible knowledge and experience and networks that are sitting here, that have sat here these 2 days? So Sarah yesterday talked about solidarity. So what kind of solidarity do we put in place? And then how do we act collectively? Is what I would like to have us maybe think about or write about or algo.
Well, thank you. And yes, thank you, Antonia. And I don't know, folks, President Biden's been signing off on a lot of executive orders lately, including on racial equity across all agencies. And to me, my question is, what does that look like at the Department of the Interior, right? How will they approach equity, particularly racial equity in the executive order, but equity overall at the Interior, particularly having Congresswoman Deb Haaland as the first Indigenous Native American person in that leadership role. And so how can we advocate and how can we support for this kind of work to be, and I think if for those who were able to listen in on Chairman Grijalva's remarks, we have a champion for us in that way. So any other comments? I see Stephanie.
I would just say that the White House was tremendously important in supporting our efforts, aligning with them, with Secretary Salazar, and then with the White House and the various initiatives they were doing was really critical to us. President Obama came to the Latinx Forum, as did Justice Sotomayor and others. So again, there's a lot of stuff going on right now, but keep your eye out on what they do actually with that equity, because that made a big difference. As I mentioned in my rampage through my presentation, President Obama designated 13 new units, all of which were national. He actually designated more, but 13 of those new units represented stories that hadn't been in the Park Service system before. And I believe all of them initially were National Historic Landmarks. So there is a strategy, and there was very much a strategy behind going for that designation as the first step in working with a community and making them comfortable with designation. That also enabled us to streamline the process once we got it going. So again, I think that things aren't clear right now, but it looks like it's going in a direction where there will be groups or people with that kind of mandate in the White House that will be, again, possible people to align with going forward.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I see, I'm going to do Anthea. I think Allison, confirm if your hand is up, and Laura too. Can I go in that order?
Hi, everyone. And sorry, I've been in and out. Our internet service has been kind of wacky, and I'm sorry I didn't get to go to the entire symposia, but congratulations, Don and everyone. It's great to be in this community and to see so many old and elder friends. And I'm right there with you. To Stephanie, hi dear, and Franklin, both of your points, as well as yours, Gail, build on, I think the need, the dire need for the type of coalition building and collaboration across agencies and instrumentary trusts like the Smithsonian. We have an alignment now with the Biden administration, with Secretary of Interior Haaland, with members like Grijalva, but really I think especially with Lonnie Bunch and others who understand. We have their first historian secretary of the Smithsonian, and the moment to try and weave all that we've been discussing these past couple of days and all that we live in our lives, I think is really powerful. And I'm happy to do whatever I can do to help with that bridge. And Lonnie knows that about this symposium, and so I think there's just a lot of energy there. I mean, our new undersecretary, our new provost is Kevin Gover, who was the second director of the National Museum of American Indians. So there's just, it's really remarkable alignment. So happy to think with all of you about what we best do with that. And we need to hit the ground running on that one, as you know. Anyway, thanks. And just thanks for letting me be here out with you.
Thanks, Anthea. And thanks for, being a champion for us at the Smithsonian. I will go to Allison and Laura. And I don't know if there's any other hands.
So I think that Michelle has started with the marshaling of the resources in terms of some sort of editorial. So I think that in terms of what has come up, that in terms of this dialogue, we want to influence policy and we want to influence the governance and the structure of public policy going forward. So we need to think about putting an editorial together with the signatories of this body and submitting it to particular places where we think people that would be looking at this would be reading. And I agree with Anthea that we need to be looking at, I hate the word, but the intersectionality of all these different institutions that impact heritage conservation. But it's not just about what we're doing with preservation. We have to look at what's going on as well in the Department of Interior, and think about the policy from that standpoint. And I actually am working on something like this with another body. I mean, we're talking 800 words and you've already gotten most of it together, okay? So, I think that that's a place to start right there. We only need 800 words, and this particular editorial could focus solely on heritage conservation reform that needs to go on at the federal level. And we wouldn't offend anybody in terms of how we put it out there, but you say what needs to be done. And we have our body of 900 people who showed up to say that, this is what we want. And I would be, happy to review everything. I mean, we only need 800 words. You got a lot of it already in terms of what you put together for the conference. So I would be, willing to participate in massaging this. And it's not like we got to have it tomorrow, because this is an ongoing process here in terms of Holland getting in the seat. And, we don't want to jeopardize her getting in the seat in terms of what we're putting out. But I think everybody understands what I'm saying.
Yes, thank you, Allison. Is there any other comments? I just want to be mindful of time, as we're supposed to end in 2 minutes. And I'm not.
Laura had her comment.
Oh.
I can be really brief. It kind of had to do with.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I kind of started formulating back when Fallon's comment about, just thinking about kind of we're coming from one perspective, but then there's other people working on the side as Section 106 review and kind of this other regulatory side of things. And I have one foot kind of in this part of preservation, but I also have one foot in preservation trades. And so I also see that as an untapped area of potential. And so when we think about saving these places and building coalitions, it's also unsiloing historic preservation as a field so that we all can be on the same page. But I think often when I think about historic preservation in this context versus trades context, it's often siloed, or, preservation trades are like kind of this other section to think about. But I think what we need to think about is the people with the knowledge to save these places physically are going to be just as important as the people who are saving these stories and figuring out ways to get through legislature and everything. And I think that's sometimes forgotten. And I work with I'm on the board of an organization that's trying to teach young people trades because of the chronic lack of people who know how to actually do these traditional trades. And this is not just like traditional Western preservation techniques. This is indigenous techniques. This is techniques from people from kind of all different walks of life in different countries that have come to the United States. And so just kind of a comment in building a coalition within our field more broadly, from us to people who deal with, regulatory efforts, but also really thinking about, we can't save these places if we have nobody to actually preserve them physically, and finding people of all walks of life and from all backgrounds capable of doing that, because then they'll also be mindful, as we all are, about these sites and places that are so important to our history.
Thank you, Laura. I see Andrea's hand is up.
Just really quickly, I feel like I have to reiterate how appreciative I am of you creating this space, Michelle, that this is your vision and your approach to putting things together and really centering voices and leaders and people of color in a way that isn't often the case in preservation, especially conferences in general. It's always, here's the pocket with the people of color sessions, and let's go over there and go to their session, or here's the big event and we're gonna let you come in and help us with planning. And I think that the precedent set today in the approach and the way that this was planned is something that should not end today. And I think I'd like to hope that of the 900, of the 103, that there are people willing to pull together. And I don't mean, I'm just going to put it out there, not just white people to go and take this idea and then call us later, but that there would be people willing to invest for a sustained biennial, at least, conference of this kind. This doesn't need to be a one-time conference. I think it needs to be a continual conference. And I think we will have to have ways to continue to have this conversation. And that would look like, I think you and I have already talked about this before. We talked about an academic journal, but something that's between an academic journal and an accessible, something that people outside of academia would be a part of. So I think, if nothing else, what we need to look at going forward is institutionalizing this, not necessarily in the institution, but making sure we do this on a regular basis.
Yes, thanks, Andrea. And I want to say, just in my presentation on API HIP yesterday, it's the same kind of formula. API HIP was started because they just want to have a convening, right? Because they didn't exist in preservation. And now it's 10 years plus later, how many forums later, we on our terms have become 501c incorporated, C3 incorporated and everything like that. Those were on our terms, right? Not on foundations, corporations, or the big P preservation people. And so I think this is something that, and I really applaud that we, hopefully this is a moment that we, not just me, but we all as a collective, hopefully have garner this energy that we can capture today and move forward collectively, as I've mentioned. And collective access, collective liberation also means collective action,
and
right?
People will come, and now people will come.
Yes. And just so folks know, for the social scientists, I am gathering all the data just on this, all the names, all the, you could see the data is being gathered. There will be, for everyone who's listening, there will be an evaluation survey after this of where do you want to go forward and who are you, identifying who you are and where do we want to go with this. This is all data to the major foundations who want to do this work, like the Mellon Foundation, the Ford Foundation, maybe even other emerging funders and supporters of how they can help support this. However, it's institutionalized. And so I want to just be mindful of time. And I know my boss, Don Linebaugh, is here. with us today. I don't know if Dennis is able or if he's teaching, but I want to give this moment really actually, as Ray had thanked Gail for her support and mentorship. I want to thank my dean, Dean Leibaugh, who I met at a informational interview for the postdoc. Him and Dennis asked me in the meeting, how can we support you? What is your dream? If you were given time to do a postdoc, and I was like, I just want to bring all my friends together. I really did. Dawn and Dennis can attest to it. I just was like, I just want to bring all my friends with me. I want to highlight everyone's work, not just mine in this postdoc. I want to bring us together, share the work, and somehow put this in the syllabus. And to note, and I guess this is my way of wrapping it up, like just for these presentations, they have been recorded. Someone's going to edit them down to each session, and they're going to be available in the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation's YouTube channel, hopefully soon. And they'll be available. I'm teaching a class in the next hour, and they're going to be watching all of these for each week for this semester. Some of you will be, if you have time, maybe asked to come and have just a follow-up discussion with my students. Hello to my students who are watching. And so, this is really a moment where we can really start to put our faces and our voices into preservation education, preservation practice. I mean, we already are, and preservation policy. So I just want to thank everyone for really being present in the last 2 days in our journey and moving our path forward. And I thank Dean Leibaugh and the Director of Historic Preservation, Dennis Pogue, for really supporting this work. I have to say that I am grateful that I get to be paid to do this work. I get to be a postdoc to do this work, which is normally you're just like mining your dissertation, but I'm not in that way. And so I just want to thank everyone and thank the team here at the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation at University of Maryland for really holding this space and being really, holding us up in these ways, even if it's just not just, but really supporting us through Zoom, through the PowerPoint support and everything like that. And we just started to hit just the surface, I think. But I'm really honored to even just to capture all of you in this screenshot right now. I'm doing even a heart as I'm doing it, to say thank you. And I am so pleased to just be with in community with all of you, and I look forward to being in community with you in the near future and in the long run. So that's kind of my concluding remarks. I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything else, but I just want to say the last thing. I think of the Filipino farm labor leaders. They not only si se puede, but for Filipinos we've said maki Baca. So in struggle and resistance, we are together, and we will continue to move forward. So thank you, and thank you to all the participants and all the attendees. Thank you. Take care, please. Be well. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks,
Bye.
Michelle.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle.
Everyone.
Thank you,
Hasta
Michelle.
luego.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Michelle.
Thank you, Antonio.
See you, Stephanie, Steve, everybody. Karen, thank you so much.
Adios. Be well, everyone.